ctrl-alt-rees.
Hi everyone, Reese here again, and today I want to show you this. Now this is my modified Atari CX78 gamepad. It's been my preferred way of playing my games for the past couple of years. It's popped up quite a lot in my social media posts, and it's also appeared in a couple of videos, and I've had some questions from people just about what it is, how I've modified it to make it compatible with the ST and the 2600, so I thought I'd put this quick video together. So I think first we'll start off with some gameplay comparisons just so I can show you how it compares to the traditional Atari joystick. So yeah, let's have a quick look. First game I want to show you is Buggy Boy, absolute childhood favourite of mine. We used to really love this game actually. Just a very simple racing game, just a case of driving the buggy through the gates and over some jumps, and you can go over rocks and do wheelies and that kind of thing. The controls are very simple, just a case of holding the joystick forwards to go forwards and pressing the fire button just to change between the low and the high gear. Now this game's actually not too bad with a half decent joystick, but as you can see with the Atari stick it's a bit of a pain. It's just difficult to hold forwards and go left or right at the same time, so you tend to find yourself losing acceleration every time you turn left or right, which isn't ideal of course. Now we'll try the same thing again with the modified joypad. As you can see, we have one button for the accelerator, which is essentially just a case of just holding that down the entire time that we're playing, and the other button just to change gear, and it makes life a lot easier. For our second comparison, I'm going to go for a game that should hopefully need no introduction. Of course, it's Prince of Persia. Now, Prince of Persia was absolutely massive back in the day, and has some modern sequels as well, of course. The original was ported to pretty much every single platform that was around at the time. The two versions that I've played the most will be the PC version and the Atari ST version, of course. The PC version is controlled with the keyboard, and it's very good as a game that relies on very precise platforming and precise timing when it comes to jumping. It really benefits from a good controller. So with the Atari joystick we really struggle because to jump we need to press up, but occasionally you'll just catch the left or the right at the same time and end up falling off a ledge or missing what you're supposed to be jumping for. I'm not deliberately trying to look for faults here, I just think this is a game that does really struggle with a bad joystick. So this game uses the joystick button for attacking other people with the sword, also for walking in the Atari ST version, so you hold down the fire button and you can walk. To jump, obviously we press up, as we do in pretty much every other platformer on the system. Now we really see the benefit of having a gamepad with a dedicated jump button. It means we can jump to get some of the secrets that are hidden in the ceilings, and obviously to get up some of these ledges, and it means we don't accidentally clip the left or the right direction while we're doing that. It also means we can take some of these running jumps with a bit more confidence and know that we're not going to fall down a pit or impale ourselves on anything. So to sum it all up, I think this is a game that definitely benefits from the gamepad. Time for another racing game, and of course we'll go with Lotus Esprit Turbo Challenge. This absolute classic multi-platform racing game from back in the day was available on the Amiga and the Atari ST. I think it was available on the PC as well, and probably a few other platforms, maybe the Amstrad. So being more of a simulation type game and a bit more complex than Buggy Boy, it's a bit more complicated to change gear in this game. Essentially you hold up on the joystick and press the button to change up, and you hold down on the joystick and press the button to change down. You would usually be holding up to be moving forwards, and you will pull backwards on the stick to decelerate. So lots of stuff to think about and lots of joystick waggling going on. Now I really did try to give this game a fair go with the Atari CX40 joystick, and I just couldn't get on with it at all. I was in the wrong gear all of the time, the steering wasn't very responsive at all, and I gave up on it pretty quickly if I'm honest. All in all, just an exercise in frustration. The joypad on the other hand is a real breath of fresh air actually. With that dedicated up button we can just hold that down pretty much constantly as we did with Boogie Boy just to keep moving forwards. To change gear we can press the two buttons at the same time to change up, or we can press down and the fire button to change down. And yeah, the steering is much more responsive, no need to move your whole hand as you do with the joystick, just like a modern game, just a small movement of the thumb just to steer left and right. And I got on so much better with the gamepad with this playtest that I actually came first in my very first attempt, so I think that says a lot. So the fourth and final game I want to look at here is Bobble, if you hadn't guessed it already from the amazing music of course. Now I'm a huge fan of this game, I have it on my main cabinet. I of course also have it on the Atari ST, which was my first exposure to this game all those years ago. Having played a few different versions of Bobble over the years, I think I can confidently say that the Atari ST is by far one of the best home conversions. It plays really well, obviously the music's very faithful to the arcade original and the sound effects as well. The graphics are absolutely spot on. But reminding myself that we're actually reviewing the joysticks here and not the game itself, I think we should get back down to business. So the arcade controls for Bobble have two buttons. We have a jump button and a fire button. If you're not familiar with the game, it basically involves capturing enemies in bubbles and then popping them. So I'm sure you can see where this is going. Now with the benefit of a dedicated jump button as well as a fire button, the movement is much tighter and much more controlled. The gameplay is closer to the arcade original, and all round just a much more fun game to play I think. As with Prince of Persia, easier to jump without worrying about having to jab left or right at the same time and going off in the wrong direction. I think the player movement's much faster just because it's quicker to switch between left and right just by moving your thumb ever so slightly rather than, yanking the joystick around all over the place. And this is a long game, and the fatigue on your hand from the Atari joystick after playing this game for maybe an hour at a time is real. Trust me, the struggle is real. It's something I experienced a lot as a kid, having completed it in two-player mode, and I think if I could go back in time 25 years and give this gamepad to 10-year-old me, he'd be a very happy chappy indeed. Finally, just very quickly, I have covered the Atari 2600 on my channel in quite a lot of detail, and this modified pad does work very well with the 2600, so it would be remiss of me not to at least give you a little glimpse here of what's possible. Obviously the gameplay on these games is not quite as complex as it is on the ST, but it still definitely benefits from the pad, so I just thought I'd show off some 2600 gameplay with the gamepad as well. So just to give you a bit more background on the CX78 pad itself, it was actually supplied with the European release of the Atari 7800. This console was released in the US in 1986 and came with something called the CX24 Proline joystick. I don't actually own one of those, and in fact I've never actually used one, so I'm not sure what it's like to use, but I've read some pretty horrific things on the internet and seen some modifications to kind of improve it and make it a bit more bearable. Obviously by the point this console came out, Nintendo had released the NES with its amazing gamepad. Of course Nintendo invented the D-pad, so pretty much revolutionised the world of gaming with that, and Atari wanted in on the action, so they released their very own gamepad alongside this console. Now I imagine many people watching this video probably grew up using one of these. This is the Atari CX40 joystick. It was released in 1977 alongside the VCS/2600 as the CX10 joystick. They made a few modifications to how it worked internally, and it was rebranded the CX40. And it's a absolutely iconic design. It's a classic. I don't want to knock it. It's a product of its time, so it is what it is. But like I said before, by the mid-80s, Nintendo had come out with the NES with its gamepad. Pretty much revolutionised the world of home gaming with that. Obviously, Atari from a arcade background themselves, so joysticks is what they knew. Joysticks are what they went with. And this joystick shipped with Atari systems pretty much till the bitter end. Even the last production runs of the ST came with a CX40 in the box. Now, some of us kids were luckier and would get something like this for Christmas maybe. This is my childhood Wico command control joystick. I've had this for 25 years now. It still works absolutely fantastically well. I have stripped it down fairly recently and just given it a good clean inside and out, but really top quality joystick. There was the Cheetah, the Competition Pro, a few other joysticks doing the rounds in the 80s and the 90s that were pretty high quality and very good replacements for Atari's CX40. But credit where it's due, and perhaps controversially coming from a die-hard Atari guy like me, Nintendo really did hit the nail on the head with their gamepad, particularly for certain types of games that were big on the NES, like platformers, obviously the Mario series. And the two buttons, generally mapped to jump and fire, were a lot more useful than Atari's one-button joystick that they'd used since 1977. Now, Atari in their infinite wisdom decided that they wanted the 7800 to be compatible with all of the existing Atari joysticks that were out there, which from a marketing point of view makes a lot of sense. The trouble is, Atari had already had their fingers burned with the release of the 5200. Now, that console used a non-standard joystick connector and obviously didn't enjoy the third-party support that Atari's other consoles had had, meaning that gamers were stuck with the joystick that came with the console, which has gone down in history as one of the worst joysticks ever made. I did actually make a video on how to upgrade the 5200 joysticks. I'll put a link up above in case you're interested in that, but that's a different story altogether. So when the 7800 was released, Atari decided to go back to the good old 9-pin joystick port, and they were very clear to the engineers that we want this to be compatible with the existing range of Atari 9-pin joysticks. Which presents a problem, because they also wanted the pad to have two buttons to compete with the NES. Now, the way that the Atari joystick works is that each direction and the fire button is mapped to a pin in the actual joystick connector. So the pin completes a circuit when the button's pressed or when the direction's pressed. And all of the pins in the 9-pin connector were used for other things. So their engineers went away and scratched their heads a bit and came up with a compromise, and they said, well, okay, we can add two buttons to the controller, but we're going to have to lose support for these. Of course, these are the old 2600 paddle controllers. And in Atari's opinion, by 1986, no one wanted to play paddle games anymore, so it was perfectly reasonable to just lose support for those. So they repurposed the controller port pins that were used for the paddles. Now, the problem with repurposing these pins, of course, is that the ST doesn't support paddle controllers and therefore doesn't expect anything to be connected to them. And the 2600 very much does support paddle controllers but doesn't expect buttons to be connected to them. So as you can imagine, the 7800 pad doesn't work with either of these in its default state as it came from the factory. Thankfully, these pads are quite simple electrically inside, and it's just a case of swapping a couple of wires around to make it work with the other systems. It's worth just bearing in mind that it means that you will lose the functionality of the second button if using the pad with the 7800, but because the 7800 is compatible with standard Atari joysticks, the pad will still work with it. And to be honest, there aren't all that many games on the 7800 that use two buttons anyway, so it's not really a huge problem. So anyway, I think I've waffled on for long enough about the history of Atari's controllers and all that boring stuff, so let's get stuck in and do some soldering. This is the controller that I'm going to be modifying today. As you can see, somebody's broken the thumbstick off at some point in the past. They do actually unscrew, but other than that it's fine. So it's just 6 screws to remove to get the back off. Due to the way Atari reused the paddle inputs on the joystick connector, they had to add 2 resistors. These are now surplus to requirements, so we're going to remove them. As we already know, there are two buttons on the CX78 controller. One of them is going to be connected to the fire button input on the joystick port, and the other one is going to be connected to the up direction. For this we're going to add an extra wire. But first things first, we need to remove the red and yellow wires as they're now surplus to requirements. I like to tape these up just so they don't make contact with anything internally. Now I'm going to disconnect the orange wire for the fire button and the black ground wire. These are going to be moved to new locations. Bear in mind that when I talk about the black ground wire, I'm talking about the wire coming from the joystick connector itself and not necessarily the wire that's bridging the connection between the two boards. In this example, this wire is actually green, but in the previous pad I did it was white, so it could be any colour. Now I'm going to add a short length of wire to bridge the connection between the up direction on the D-pad and the number 2 button. As the original wire is white, I'll use the same colour just to save any confusion. Now that our new up button is dealt with, all we need to do is reconnect the fire button and the ground and reassemble the pad. So there we go, and I've just remembered I've got this weird pre-release version of Turrican 2 that I was going to review at some point as well, so I think I'll probably do that in a video pretty soon. So I've shown off my preferred way to play Atari games with this pad. I've shown you all how to modify one if you want to carry out the modification yourself, perhaps. Of course, there's plenty of other options out there, and I'd love to hear if you have a preferred joystick or maybe even a gamepad that's compatible with these systems. I'm always open to options and always looking for stuff to have a play with and to feature in my videos, so please let me know in the comments down below. If you could give this video a like if you enjoyed it, that helps with my visibility of my channel and helps me to grow my audience. And of course, if you haven't subscribed already, I'd very much appreciate it if you subscribed. So thank you very much, and I'll see you soon.